Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've got a bin that I'd like to feed. But which shall it be? It's actually the bin that's paired up with the missing bin. A lot of my systems are sort of paired up, so like these three buckets are handled as just a single unit, all fed on the same day at the same time. These two up here have been paired up. These are paired up because they were started on the same day as were those two down there. I believe that there's only these two systems that are handled as independent single bins. And normally this bin here, the last but not least, the one that we're feeding today, actually does have a buddy bin, which is off on what I've been referring to as special assignments. So today we're just feeding this bin alone. This is probably like the third or maybe even the fourth time we're handling this bin's feeding alone. It's been 26 days now since that other bin went off on special assignment. It's still busy on that special assignment, so someday soon we'll be able to rejoin it with its buddy. But for now, its buddy is due for a feeding after 13 days, so let's get it up on the bench and take care of business. What they got last time was cantaloupe and lettuce and a little bit of worm chow. Today they're getting a wider range of different things. These are like some things that come out of a soup after it's been cooking for a while. It just gets pulled out because it's not the sort of thing you want to eat, but it leaves the soup with some really delicious flavors. There's some apple peel in here, banana peels, celery. I think these might be parts of beets or something. I believe that the majority of these things were all contributed by my mom. So it looks like a pretty good sized feeding. It's got some pretty decent weight to it. Hopefully the worms will be appreciative of what they're getting. When we left this bin last, they got a whole nice big quantity of leafy material sprinkled out across the top. I'm actually a little bit surprised not to see worms hanging out here because it's obvious there's even little drops of water here and there. The moisture that condenses on that top covering of bubble wrap just pretty much drips right back down into the bedding. I guess we didn't have to go far to start bumping into a few worms. This leafy material looks like it was piled on pretty generously here on the top surface. And maybe the moisture that's recirculating is just making its way down deep enough that the worms don't feel a need to cruise all the way out to the surface to hang out. Although, you gotta admit, there is some traces of castings and stuff, and even some cocoons here and there. So there's evidence of worm activity on the top surface, even though there were none there to greet us when we first arrived. I've got some information about this system laid out over here. I guess the one thing that sort of took me a little bit off guard when I was pulling this stuff off my tracking spreadsheet was the estimated quantity of worms being just a little bit over 800. It's not really many worms. And I don't know if we've already been skeptical of that number and questioned whether it's accurate or not. I guess we could try to keep that number in mind to see if we agree with it or if it's possible that maybe they've actually increased their numbers over the past 144 days since they've been occupying this bin. I don't know, my first impression just from seeing what I'm seeing here is that we may have already seen 800 and some odd worms just from digging up that little corner there. Red wigglers are like that. Red wigglers are pretty prolific breeders. You give them space to move into, they'll do it, and then they'll go ahead and start creating baby worms to help fill in the available space. But then again, maybe there's just something unusual about that edge that we just examined. Maybe there's a whole bunch of worms there and no worms elsewhere. Nah, I think that's pretty unlikely. I just think that that number, for whatever reason, is a slightly underestimated population count. Any number like that, unless it's like a really simple round number, like what I estimated the buckets, the yellow buckets, all have started with an estimated 400 worms in them. When I see a real simple rounded number like that, I assume that those were just estimates made by myself alone without any help from the viewers. But all the other bins that I have running nowadays all have a documented estimated worm count, which was all compiled with the help of you, the viewers. So I'll throw my guesstimate into the hat, but then I'll take everyone else's guesstimates as well and average all those numbers to come up with a number that I guess sort of takes the really high guesstimates and the low guesstimates, and just by averaging it sort of cancels those out in a way by averaging it. And then you start to get a more plausible number of worms. So here's, I guess this would be the end of a piece of cantaloupe. Pretty popular item here. They're still nibbling the remaining flesh off the rind. I could see a little bit of it still glistening there. So they're enjoying that, but they're not quite done. I'm a little bit surprised. We've given them almost 2 weeks to work that stuff down, but they're still working on it. Now, I don't think there were corn cobs fed last time, but I know that we did explore a corn cob last time. We actually sort of managed to split it long ways. Doing so revealed the center core of it, which at that time was still in place. And I gotta tell you, I'm a little bit surprised to find it here again. Oh, that's kind of cool. All those castings left behind by the worms cruising the inside of the corn cob. Last time, too, we were able to simply extract this inner piece, which I thought is usually gone in no time, because usually you see kind of like just a gaping hole running down a corn cob. So we did that last time too. We just took an existing corn cob. If we find one that's already sort of split in half like that, we did the same thing last time. We split it open, we checked out that inner core. At that time I even squeezed that inner core and I was able to extract a good amount of juice just came flowing out of this stuff. So this stuff's really got a much higher moisture content to it than I expected, really. I thought the inner core of a corn cob would not be that juicy, but it is. Oh, this might be it right here, right? I attempted to just throw that inner core piece right back in the middle and fold it back shut the way it was, but my guess is that that inner core was probably eaten up by now. So if we find any trace of it, I'd be a little bit surprised. Yeah, I think on numerous occasions in the past we've sort of acknowledged the fact that that estimated worm count for this system is probably severely lacking. I seriously doubt that this system has only 800 or 900 worms in it. My guess is we could probably double that amount and still be shy of the actual population of this bin. Someday we'll get to the point where we can, you know, extract their castings, gather up the worms, get them relocated into a new home. It's usually at that time I try to seek the input of the viewers, since that's usually the time we're able to get the best look at how many worms we're dealing with, to see if we can come up with some sort of a realistic estimate for how many worms we're dealing with. But today's not that day. Today we're just giving them some yummy foods. So I'm attempting to create a nice large opening here, because not only do I want to give them that fairly generous portion of food, I've also got my prepared bedding here, a batch that I created a little bit more of, so this will be our first use of that fresh batch I just created. Usually I do like to let the stuff sit around a little bit before I start using it in my worm bins, but today they're going to be getting it kind of in a fresh state. I guess what I'm trying to do is avoid implanting any worms into my supply of bedding, because if these are red wigglers, as I think they are, then we wouldn't want to go feeding like a nightcrawler bin later and end up introducing foreign species. Not that a single worm would really cause a problem, and also not to say that my my worm bins are true, pure examples of only the type of worm that I state are in those systems. I'm pretty sure that what's living in these worm bins is just a big mishmash of who knows what. All right, let's get all these leftovers that we stumbled on the way back down into the feeding area. And since the food I'm feeding today is all frozen, I think we're going to pile on a little bit more bedding just so we don't end up piling the frozen stuff on top of any worms. Especially this little pile of worms here. They probably wouldn't appreciate getting bombarded with a whole bunch of frozen stuff. So let's grab a little bit more of my prepared bedding as a insulating layer here. And I guess before we drop in the kitchen scrap type food, I also have my worm chow here. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of this into this bedding down here. And we can give them even more, but we don't really have to, you know, if you think about it. That portion that they're getting here is a fairly good one. And I think we'll see it better once we drop it all in. So let's take a look at what they're getting. There's a good number of banana peels in here. I don't know if my mom made like banana bread or something like that. Where all these banana peels came from, I don't know, but there's a lot of them. This I know is extracted from the broth after the soup has been made, and all of the flavor from this stuff has been handed off to the broth. The vegetable itself is not a really good thing to eat if you're a human, but if you're a worm, you're probably going to enjoy it a lot. So this is a fairly generous feeding, if you ask me. And I'm glad to see that we've probably got more than just 800 some odd worms in here to take care of it for us. But I can't seem to resist wanting to just bring one more handful of fresh bedding in here, as long as we're at it. Just to give the whole shebang a little top covering. And then I think we could begin restoring the system to a nice level state. Sort of the way we found it, but maybe a little higher now, considering we added such a huge amount of material here. We didn't really get a chance to explore this side of the bin yet. So I also thought that maybe in the process, while we start shoving things over to cover up the feeding, we can also peek down in there too to see how things are coming along. My guess is it's going to be not terribly different from what we saw before. And if it is, then that's a good thing, because I think things in here look really good. Almost excellent, if I had to say so. I just figured since I don't have any leaves right now, my supply of prepared shredded paper and cardboard mix was prepared with what I had left of my leafy material, my box of leaves. So I depleted my supply of leaves with which I would normally cover things up. Now over here, for whatever reason, it seems like we've just got a material that's just so much more dense in castings, like far fewer bits of odds and ends of leftover bedding or food particles. On this side, it looks like it's almost pure castings. The stuff looks really nice. And even though it's got a fairly high moisture content, here I can see a little bit of it seeming to clump together into a little ball of mud almost. But that's really the exception, I think, not the rule. So I think that adds up to the material being almost perfect as far as the way the worms like it as far as moisture. Maybe that's why there's so many of them in there. I mean, they're everywhere. They're just really, they're everywhere. I'm almost thinking like that 800 estimate, forget doubling it. I'm almost thinking we could probably triple it and still be shy of the actual worm count in here. Which is great, you know. It's so good to see that the worms are thriving and they're happy, and so much so that they're expanding their numbers and taking advantage of the space they've gotten here. So I think we're pretty much done here. I think I've satisfied my curiosity for the most part as far as how things are doing in here. I think what we'll do is we'll just try to bring over some of this leafy material that was still fresh when we placed it in here last time. At this point, it's almost 2 weeks in progress. But since it was out on the surface, for whatever reason, it just didn't seem to get a whole lot of traffic. I'm surprised. Especially considering the huge number of worms living in here. I would have thought that maybe there'd be a whole bunch of them hanging out on the surface. But no, that was the one weird surprising thing to me when we first went in here. So I don't know, see if we could spread these leaves out a little bit better all over the place and try to level things off. I guess the one thing sort of missing here, a little bit different from all my other systems, is usually I've got some sort of a feeding zone indicator out here in the middle just to show we fed in the middle, or wherever we feed is where we place the feeding zone indicator right on top of it to show where the last feeding zone was. And you know, I do have a collection of coffee filters, so I'm going to grab one. I'll go ahead and place it right there. And in a lot of cases, I'll also put a top covering of newspaper out here too, right over everything. And I'm questioning whether we would want to do that or not bother. I don't know. It doesn't seem to make a difference. Why don't we skip it for now? We'll just go ahead and we'll cover up with the plastic the way we found it. But before we do, I'm just going to examine my gloves to make sure we're not taking any unfortunate wormies for a wild ride. One that would almost certainly end up with them getting flushed down the drain, because the sink is my next stop to get myself cleaned up. And then I'll start putting stuff away, but I don't need to keep you around for that. That stuff's boring. Before I go though, really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, As always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.